This is a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive.
Welcome to another NHL team season preview video here on the Ice Guys. Ian Cameron, Alex B. Smith. 32 teams in 32 days. Our team previews for the upcoming season roll along. And in this video, we are going to talk about the Colorado Avalanche, who, for the last few years, we viewed them in the upper echelon of the Western Conference. We viewed them as a surefire Stanley Cup contender. And I'm not saying that can't be the case this year either, but there are some question marks to work through with this Colorado Avalanche team. I think what stands out about Colorado to me is that a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, when they started to make this run, put it together with Cale Makar's emergence on this team, Nathan MacKinnon playing like one of the best players in the NHL, and obviously it goes without saying Rantanen and some of the other supporting cast as well up front that have been phenomenal too. That they had a lot of depth everywhere just a few years ago. Up front, the top four lines were outstanding. I think 1 through 6 on the blue line as good as it gets. This year, things could be a little bit different in that regard. You look at Colorado last year, and certainly it's a team that still had a very good season overall, regular season, 107 points. They had some suspect performances, though, some crazy games. I remember them getting blown out by the Florida Panthers, quite honestly, at one point early in the season, or January it was at home, and just the kind of shit you would thought you'd never see from Colorado. And of course, in the playoffs, it kind of came unglued for them against the Dallas Stars in the second round. And of course, we remember that's when unfortunately, the shit hit the fan with the Big Val Nichushkin news, and that he had been obviously suspended. And now, look, obviously, Colorado had issues with that, and you could tell it shook the team. They really didn't recover at the end of that Dallas series. And to be honest, that series was up for grabs. And then all of a sudden, that news came out, and Dallas took over from that point on. Dallas was the better team anyway, but still, that didn't help. And Colorado will look to rebound, I guess you could say, from that news and move forward. Presumably, you would think, without Big Val Nichushkin on the team. You look at this team as far as their numbers last year. They were the number one scoring team in the NHL. Nobody scored more goals per game last year than Colorado. 3.68 goals per game at the offensive end of the ice for them. Defensively, though, that was where the concerns lie. For Colorado, because they were a bottom half of the NHL team defensively last year. Teams like Pittsburgh, believe it or not, gave up fewer goals per game than the Colorado Avalanche last year. So why was the defense all of a sudden a bit of an issue when you've got, Cale Makar and Devon Taves and Sam Girard and Manson leading that blue line? Well, if you got more suspect nature in net. And that definitely was on display last year with Alexander Georgiev. Don't get me wrong, Georgiev capable of a terrific game and a good performance, but way too often, far too much last year, we saw below average goaltending, and in a lot of cases, way below average goaltending from Alexander Georgiev last year. You look at the way his regular season ended, it was not good at all. Now, it was good enough for them to get past Winnipeg in the first round. And even then he was okay. He wasn't great. It was more so the star goaltender, the very much renowned Connor Hellebuck, actually maybe shit the bed even worse in that playoff series than did Georgiev. And that kind of helped things out for Colorado. And then he faced obviously a guy in Jake Ottinger at the other end who was clearly the superior goalie and couldn't match it. Well, the bottom line is there's still grave concerns in net. Yeah, Alexander Georgiev, until proven otherwise, and I haven't seen it yet, to me, he's not a guy you can win a Stanley Cup with. Now, I know you could say, hey, wait a minute now. They won with Kemper a couple of years ago. Kemper had a great season for the most part last year. Georgiev still got to show it for me. We don't know I don't know what the Colorado, maybe they do. Then again, maybe they don't. But I damn sure can tell you, I don't know what they have in Justus Annunen. I certainly have to see more from him as far as this Finnish goaltending prospect that they have. Look, up front, Drouin, bounce back year, one of the positives last year. MacKinnon, Rantanen, Lehkonen was terrific. Actually, Middlestat played well after they got him from Buffalo, and I got to give him credit. They got more from him than I thought. They really like this Nikolai Kovalenko. We're going to be seeing a lot more of him, a lot of talent there that they help is going to make this top six just as dynamic up front as they've been. But the concern, again, much like it was last year with Colorado, is do they have enough in the bottom six? Because I thought the bottom six, there was a noticeable drop last year, noticeable decline in the production offensively from the third and the fourth line compared to just 2-3 years ago. And this year, when you go into the year, you've got Miles Wood, Ross Colton, capable players, very, very streaky, I guess you could say, last year. Logan O'Connor, I'd like to see an offensive game for him take another step this year. If those three come together on that third line, you could have something there, but still, it's an if. And then in the fourth line, when you talk about Yoel Kiviranta and Chris Wagner, and they bring in Parker Kelly from Ottawa, are you going to get enough punch from those guys is the big question. Blue line's still pretty good. Still one of the better blue lines in the NHL, and certainly as far as the six goes, right? Taves, Makar, Gerard, Manson, Eric Brandstrom on the team. And I really do like the get from Calgary, assuming he can stay healthy. And that's been a problem. But if he can stay healthy, he's a good defenseman. He was in Calgary, and that's Oliver Shillington. I like that they brought him in, the Colorado Avalanche. So that blue line's still very good. Maybe not quite the depth to replace some of the injured parts. I mean, we're talking about Calvin DeHaan, who's been injury prone and somewhat of a decline the last 2 years. Keaton Middleton, is a drop off from the other six that they have. So there may not be the quality depth. Like for years, it's been plug and play. Someone gets hurt on the blue line, you're bringing in someone really good for Colorado. I'm not sure if it's going to be that same way this year. And of course, in goaltending, gigantic question mark still for Georgiev. So very interesting team. But when you talk about this Western Conference as a whole, and in particular the Central Division, when you look at the nature of the makeup of that division, and a lot of the teams are going to be better. Nashville, it goes without saying what they did. You've still got to deal with the Dallas Stars. What will we see from the Colorado Avalanche? I'm certainly not running to bet over their point total. And again, this is a team as well. Pace yourself in the regular season. We don't have to go, full frontal assault on the 82-game schedule when we've got bigger fish to fry and more grandiose plans, and that's raising Lord Stanley in the month of June. So why would you put as much of an onus in just, President's Trophy and all these winning divisions and all that? I think it's more, let's improve. Let's get into the playoffs. Let's make sure we're at least getting in and go from there. Certainly not in a rush to be betting the Colorado Avalanche over their season point total. Alex, what do you think here, Colorado?
Yeah, this is an interesting team because, like you said, we're just so kind of used to them being at the top of the Central, one of the better teams in the Western Conference, and they're just finding their way into the playoffs. And like I said, they don't have any urgency to necessarily go out and win the division or be the best team in hockey. But at the same time, because they don't have that depth, they don't have that balance, even just in their regular lineup, but certainly they don't have the depth to withstand injuries, which injuries have been a huge issue for Colorado in the last several years. Even when they won the Stanley Cup, they still had to deal with the tons of injuries and issues along the way. So it has me kind of bullish on this Colorado team. And the most dangerous thing about an actual Avalanche is that it keeps gaining momentum as it rolls downhill. So if you have where, Gabriel Landeskog is set to come back, shortly after the start of the season, he's missed 2.5 years, it seems like. If he's not ready to fit in, if something happens with a top guy like Nathan McKinnon, something happens with a Cale Makar or Alexander Georgiev, who's been your absolute workhorse, things could go from bad to ugly really fast for Colorado. And like you said, when you talk about a Dallas team that's still good, a Nashville team that has really improved overnight, and you've got teams that can give you a rough night in Minnesota, in Chicago, in Utah during the season. You can't afford to all of a sudden now be, we've lost 6 out of 8 games, 8 out of 10 games. You find yourself behind the 8 ball, and nothing's going to be easy on the Pacific quadrant. So Colorado has to be careful. The ceiling for them is, they go on and win the Stanley Cup for the first time in a couple of years, but the floor could be this team completely misses out on the playoffs. And you look at the back end, Alexander Georgiev, I think he's a fine goaltender, but it's also not 2004. It's 2024. You can't be playing a guy 63 games. And everybody will look and say, well, he had 38 wins coming off of a 40-win season. And what I noticed is he's played 116 starts in the last 2 years, regular season and playoffs combined. That's just way too much hockey, and especially for a guy who was his ceiling in New York was basically just be the stopgap for Shesterkin. They wanted this guy to be a 20, 25 game a year kind of guy and just go through the motions. No one expected him to really emerge to be this top kind of guy that can be a top 10, top 15 goalie in this league. I think he has the talent, but I think Colorado has to manage him in a much better direction. And like I said, Justus Annunen has to have the step-up year that they're expecting him to have. We've seen flashes of brilliance from him in the AHL at times. But if he could step up now, knowing he's the backup and you know you got 25 games at least, maybe he can show something then, and maybe he can emerge being a top tier backup or a number 2 option, and that could keep Georgiev fresh enough to where this Colorado team can actually do some damage in the playoffs, do some damage in the second half. So it's a complete wait and see for me with this Colorado team. They have tons of offense, but if the defense can't keep up, the goaltending, can be iffy at times, and if they have any kind of injuries, things could get really bad for the Avs this year.
102 and a half looks like their point total right now. And I know they were a 107-point team last year, but I don't think they're matching 107. And I'm not getting the wiggle room I'm looking for an over, at 102 and a half, because I think they'll drop, and there's a potential they drop by more than 5 points from last year, that they're 100 or maybe even high 90s with just how much quality and how much of a friggin' just it's a tough conference. There's a lot of good teams. There's still a lot of contending teams around them in the West, and you're going to see Chicago's and San Jose's and Anaheim's and Seattle's going to have a bounce. I mean, there's just so many teams around them projected for improvement that it's going to take points here and there from a team like Colorado.
And before you want to start jumping into our DMs about how we're saying we might be down on Colorado, keep in mind a 94, 95-point team that gets in the wild card has just as good of a chance as anybody to win the Stanley Cup. And if they have all the complementary pieces that we're talking about healthy in time for April, then they'll be a dangerous out, because this is a team that we know they can win on the road. So, okay, if anything, taking the pressure off of them where they have to start games 1 and 2 on the road in a best-of-7 series might actually work in their hand and in their favor a little bit. This is a veteran team once you get into the playoffs. The thing is, navigating the 82-game schedule might just be a little bit trickier this year than it has been in seasons past.
Got to work on that. Got to work on goaltending's a question. Goals against was worse last year. There's everything about this team offensively is still elite. Top scoring team in the regular season, top 5 power play last year as well in the regular season. But my gosh, penalty kill dropped to middle of the pack, and defensively overall goals against per game dropped to the bottom half of the NHL. That means they were in the 17th to 32nd part of the NHL as far as goals against, and that's going to have to get better if Colorado is going to be a cup winner.
And one thing to watch out for, too, from a betting standpoint this year is we were all over this last year. Colorado down a goal live in the second period, heading into the third period. They were money makers coming from behind, especially at home. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I don't know if they have that kind of talent to where if they're down 4-2, 5-2, they're going to be able to pull themselves back up and get back in games. So tread a little lighter with looking at Colorado from a live angle this year. Like I said, that of course could change at any moment, but I just don't think we're going to have as much success as we did last year. I mean, it was about 7 or 8 games where we were all over them at some big prices, and they ended up coming back to win with in-game looks.
That's a product of them wearing teams down in the third period. The high altitude, thin air gets to the opponent. It doesn't get to them because they're used to it, and they just take it to the opponent and they wear them down. That was a big component of it. But you got to think there's some regression in that third period comeback department, even on home ice this year. I agree.
Now, you touched on a very interesting point. You mentioned the important word here, altitude. Keep in mind that we now have Utah in the Central Division. A lot of those trips that were now Arizona, Colorado are now Utah, Colorado, which means 2 to 3 days total in higher altitude and elevation. Could we see where Colorado, and we'll mention it down the road with Utah, be the beneficiary of catching some teams that are very tired coming out of the altitude in one spot and then playing in another?
Yeah, which is be as tough a tandem, if you will, a two-step road trip, two-step, if you will, Colorado to Utah or vice versa this year in the NHL for teams that end up having the unfortunate circumstance of that on their schedule this season. Great stuff. That is the Colorado Avalanche team preview for the upcoming season. And again, more NHL team season preview videos coming up here, courtesy of the Ice Guys. Thanks for tuning in.